So this is just a continue on from the last video where we set things up in Blender, getting getting things prepped up, fixing up the collider file so that we're getting rid of any of those doubles as far as vertices go and that sort of thing. And on the last one, I was just starting to set up my camera, moving it in position, and then my Blender version of Blender froze. Okay, it's a really good lesson especially when we change kind of into different modes within our workflow. Good thing to save. Okay, so if you're moving into rendering, you've been modeling for a while, moving into rendering, hit that save button if you don't have autosave, which you can turn on in preferences. Or if you're moving into sculpting or moving into something different, then it's a good idea. Save your work. Okay, 3D, like it's prone to crashing. It's not the software's problem. It's just like it's a complex area, and it's easy to kind of build things that like just have crazy parameters and can just end up being extremely difficult to process. So it's just the way it goes. All right, so we're heading back into Blender today. So we can see here the type of target image we're talking about. This is one I rendered off our scene we've been having a look at. And we can see there's got a few kind of things to note. It's got really flat materials, so there's no sheen on the materials. So they're nice and simple. All the planes, no texturing either. They're really super simple. And we can see in this one that the shadows are really sharp. And also that the lighting, it's kind of, the scene's fairly backlit, and we've got like a blue sky, which is all adjustable as well. And simple color palette. Yeah. Okay, so let's go for it. I haven't got my mouse with me today, so I'm flying without a mouse, which slows me down a little bit, but our scene is pretty much set up and we just need to, get things moving along. So we're back to our scene here. Last time I moved the camera so it was looking out through these arches, and that's pretty good at the moment. But there's a few other things we've got to sort out here. And lighting is first and foremost, really. So at the moment, I'll get rid of this light here. We don't need any lights anymore. So let's go X that one. Okay, so I'll just delete that, and I've got another light here. So this was my original lamp that was a sun lamp that we were using to just to get a bit of an idea of what was going in light-wise. We can turn that down to 0 like this, or we can delete it completely. It doesn't really matter, but I might just go X, delete that out. We'll just take some complexity out of our scene for starters, and we're looking pretty good. But if I move now into our rendered mode, we can see we've got no lighting. We're in Eevee at the moment, so I'm just going to move 2 cycles, and we've got this kind of plasticky scene, but we haven't really got any lighting in our scene. So it's time to fix that. So let's get things going. So what we want to do is come up here. We've got on the side this world tab, so it looks like the world with it's got a couple of axes sticking out of it. And we can see here currently the surface is the background, and the color is grey. So yeah, it's casting grey, and the strength is 1. Okay, all pretty standard stuff for our first scene. So let's just change that now. So I'm going to come down to shader editor. As you can see before, I just kind of like pulled up this timeline sits down the bottom here, but we can repurpose it. We can repurpose any of these windows however we want. So this one's got a little clock to say it's the timeline, but I want to go to the shader editor. Shader editor helps us, it's a nodes viewer that helps us to like adjust materials. And now a lot of times we'll use it for the object here, so you can see object, but we can also change this to be the world. So let's have a look at, I'll zoom in a little bit here. Let's have a look at what our world is actually kind of like doing here. Whoops, wish I had my mouse with me. Okay, that's cool. At the moment, you can see that we've got this grey, and I'll move this across so we can sort of see that again, is that The grey colour, which is the background, is going onto the surface, which is the world output. Okay, pretty straightforward stuff, but we're going to add a node, texture node, and we're going to go to a sky texture. Okay, all right, so there's our node. The node outputs data, and usually we like to connect these nodes, unless we really know what we're doing, but we try and connect them colour to colour. Start off, okay? So we just click on one, drag it out, and you can see it snaps the wire into the other one. And immediately we've got a sun, and we can see up here it's starting to light our scene. Great, okay? Now this is quite highly lit. Look, it's good. It's good looking scene, but often that I find that they're just a touch blown out, these types of once you apply this. So what I often do is I'll come down to our render, and I'll pop on down to color management down the bottom here. That's cool. And I'll take our exposure down. Well, as you can see, you can go right down. It's a bit crazy. But if we go around the sort of -2 to -3, I usually, dial it in at about -3. That's cool. That gives us a kind of like a nice sky to work with. And it gives us, good shadows, good sky, and we don't need to change around the sun intensity. So if we left that up on 0, it'd get a little bit tricky we'd get things maybe a little bit overexposed. So we can leave that where it is. There's a couple of interesting commands here that we can start to use. So let's have a look. Might move this down a little bit so we can see this a little bit better on screen. So we've got the sun size here, and the sun size, you can see it's an angle. So if we take it down to like 0.1, we'll see that the shadows sharpen right up. And if we take them out to something like, 20 degrees, then we're going to see, you can see that the shadows become much softer. So the light is refracting more like if it was coming through a cloud or something like that. And we're getting light sort of bouncing around. So we can change the look of our shadows with that. That's good. So it just depends what kind of look you're after. If you're after like really hard shadows, carving lines, geometric lines onto objects like I showed you in that first image, then that's a good way to go. But if you want kind of like subtle variations of color, then we can go for this type of way as well. Okay, so I think we might leave it like that. And let's have a look now. So once we've got it, the great thing about this, apart from actually adding in a sky, it allows us to start rotating the scene. Okay, so we can start to light it from the front, light it from the back. So let's have a look maybe at these shadows in here, in this scene here. We can just see the difference that the sun size makes. So if it's on 20, we can see there's soft shadows up around here, and they're getting softer as they sort of move away from the objects that are creating the shadows. But let's take it down to say 0.1, and we can see now, see how it's got these sharp shadows that are going across. They're not like fading away in intensity. And that's cool. And so like if you're working with shadows, it's often worth rotating the sun a bit, thinking about how those shadows cast on the buildings, and also playing around with the sort of the rotation and the elevation. So you can see these sort of interesting shapes. Little highlight on the top of the stairs here sort of draws your eye to the stairs. So that's all cool. And then we can see through here, we're getting some interesting kind of like light, bouncing off as well. So that's all good. So I think that we're pretty much set up for doing a render in our scene. Let's just sort of go back and have a look now. We can see everything's looking nice. The other thing here is if we're looking at the sky, we've got the ability to mess around with the air. So you can see like well, we can go up to some real heavy smog, or we can go right down to like it's hardly got any atmosphere, and then we start to turn it up as we get to close to 1. It's sort of close to an Earth type atmosphere, okay? So the light's bouncing around in the atmosphere and it's creating that, that blue colour that we associate with the sky. We've also got the dust, so we can up the dust particles, or we can kind of cut the dust particles down. A lot of times I tend to like push those down a little bit. And the ozone, we can turn that up and we can get kind of like a crisper blue sky. So a lot of times I'll start to like push the ozone up a little bit, and it'll give this kind of like a really crisp sky, a bit like you're at a higher altitude, and you can dial in the altitude. You could dial in, like 8,000 meters. We'll dial that in and see how that gives us, a different look to our sky as well. So they're worth messing around with, to give you just like a, interesting kind of like style to your, to the way the sky looks. So don't be afraid to, mess around with that. You don't have to, be going for total realism. Come up with something interesting. So I can see that this, let me just click, I've got that, gives it interesting look off into the distance at the moment. So, work on that. Okay, so we're set up pretty well. Now, what I was doing before is I was setting my camera up. So I've got my camera sitting there, and I can have a look at what my camera is doing by clicking on my camera here. So that's pretty good. And I've got my camera set up looking through my arches, so I can move it around. So let's just say I'm finished with my, that for the moment. I might change it to 3D viewport. And I might sort of like roll out here, and I can see that there's my camera down here. So I might like select my camera. So this crosses my move, and that then allows me to kind of like move the camera in and out of my scene. And that's cool. Back. My computer's just having a little bit of a problem when I have a render open and have too many windows going. I think it's just because of the resizing and using QuickTime to record the video. No big deal. So I'm back to where I was a few seconds ago. And so I think it's a good idea that instead of having this in full render mode, I'll turn it down to just like solid mode here, up in these shader balls, and that'll make it run a little bit better. So what I was doing was I've got my camera down here, and I can basically manipulate my camera now, and I can sort of like move it in the scene. So the top one is showing me what the camera's actually seeing, and the bottom one is like allowing me to select my camera and move it around. If you can't find your camera in this scene, you can just select it out of your collection up here. So you can select all your objects using this way. I want to select that light, I can select the light. I want to select the camera, click on the camera. That's pretty good. Okay, now another trick that I've got when I've got my camera selected, I can hit the N key, which brings out this transform tab, and it allows me to accurately set my rotation of my camera. So we can see here I've got it set at 90 degrees, so it's looking like really directly through these arches. The Y rotation I've got set at 0, and I've got the Zs, so it's not like skewing, on an angle as we look down the barrel. And the Z, I've got it just slightly off 0, just not much, it's pretty close, okay? So you can adjust these if you want like accurate, so it's well worth setting these up as like 90, 0, 0, and that will give you like a straight camera to work with, because when you open Blender, the camera itself is always like the default camera is like set up on a annoying angle. I wish they would fix that. I don't know why it needs to be like that. It's just like just a waste of time fixing it. You can fix it in your start file, but you might never bother. Okay, so we're good. So we've got this scene, and I added just for the hell of it, I added this like ball down the end. So if you remember when we had a look at that Joy video earlier, like things like repeating patterns and circles, they're all really kind of interesting. So yeah, so I added just this extra element because you're looking through all these arches, kind of like it wants to lead your eye towards something. So in this case, we'll just add this abstract kind of form. I'll put a glass material on it so it's kind of reflective, and it's just going to sit out the end there. So that's all looking pretty good at the moment. So basically all we've got to do is this one, I might just turn this off as far as I don't want to run too many windows at once. You can if you want, but I'm just going to maybe just, doesn't really matter, I'm just going to push it back. I can make it a timeline again. That'll use no effort whatsoever. I might even turn it into shader editor with world, and I can maybe just adjust this sun size as I'm looking down this the barrel of this render. So let's have a look here. So let's just, I'm going to move it up to rendered mode. Okay, that's good. And you can see this is the scene within my camera. So everything's looking pretty well centered, I think. It's pretty good. And I can experiment with by the sun size. I could sort of like take this right down to 0 and have these really hard shadows, or I can take the sun size up a bit and I can start to sort of like soften those off. And I might have them a little bit softer like that. Yeah, that's pretty good. I might come down a little bit just so it's got a bit of texture on the ground as we look down at this, look down at this thing. And yeah, just letting, excuse me, just letting the renderer take a few seconds to resolve this. And that looks pretty cool. Okay, so we've got ourselves a scene here. It looks like it's doing the trick. Think about your composition. Are you using rule of thirds? Are you putting things in centers? You know, are you using like colors to delineate different shapes? Things like that. It's all possible. It's all a good thing to do. You know, you don't have to use rule of thirds, but even if you're just aware of it, it can help you to be, you know, proactive in the way that you set your camera up. Now, looking at the camera itself, we better just have a look at how I've got it set up at the moment. So I've got it set up with actually just a real super standard 50mm focal length, and not really anything else very exciting. But what I have done, if you come down to this next one, which is sort of like supposed to be like a printout, or the, you know, I've got, normally you might have like 1920 by 1200 here as a kind of standard. I've dialed it up to 1920 by 1920. So I've just put it into a square format. Oh, it's kind of like a really formal geometry that we're looking at, as though it's like some Renaissance painting that's really taking advantage of perspective. So yeah, I'm playing up on that by having this square image. And also, like, if you're putting it onto like modern websites, it's square format. It's really great. You don't have to mess around. You know, it looks the same on different screens, etc. So square format, I like it. And everything's looking good. So what we do, golden rule always, is like hit that save button. Super good way to go. And then all you basically got to do is you're ready to go. You can set up where your image is going to save to under this print one here. So we can come down to output, and you can see at the moment this is set to save in the temp file on the machine. That's really a bit of a pain. So what I might do is set up on the desktop actually, and go accept, and that's more like it. We can choose the file type here. So we've got a PNG, RGBA, color depth, compression. That's all you know, it's all pretty decent. One other super handy thing you can do here is if you've got this dialed up at 1920 by 1920, but you want to do a test render, you can dial this down to like something small and it will render, you know, a percentage of the size. And then later on, you can be like, yeah, lighting's looking good, I'll crank it up, do that. But what I'll do is basically, as long as we've got things saved, and I'll just be super careful, I'll do it again. And then you just go up to render. And if all we want to do is do a render image, okay? So we go render image and the computer goes and does its calculations and comes up with our image. And we can see up here, we've got sample 5 of 150. So you'll see that in this, if I look at the camera back, I set the amount of max samples here to 150. So it's going to improve 150 times, which is not a heaps, but it's not too bad either. It's just kind of like a in-between setting. But we can see now that it's starting to render. We're getting some nice kind of like subtle lighting and shadow. This render out the end, this kind of material, which is a glass, is rendering out pretty decent. It's all pretty good. I can squeeze the zoom out so I can see my finished render, how it's looking, and that's looking pretty good, okay? And I've got somewhere in here, I have actually got that render open. I think this one, oh, that is number 2, but I've also saved the number 1 somewhere. This one here, so I saved the end result of that one, just so I don't have to wait for it to cruise through. So you can see the types of things that are going on here. If I wanted to improve this ball a bit more, I might add a smooth surface to this. You can see it's just got a couple of artifacts around the edge. I could easily take that into Photoshop and tune it up. So it's a good thing to always think about tuning your work up. But I'm pretty pleased. It's got some nice kind of like 3-dimensional definition here, and it looks nice and crisp. So going from like the easy world of modelling up things in SketchUp, you know, we've brought it through in what's essentially, there's a few little complexities to it, but it's a pretty nice, easy pipeline to move your images through, and you're able to come up with a good result. So that is pretty much it for now. So thanks for your time. Have a go with moving that camera obviously around, change that focal length, you know, see what other things you can see. So I've got looking through the arches on mine, the way I set it up, and I also had this other scene that was just off to the left of that, which I created with a few different shapes, and just set my sun up just so it's got this kind of like, you know, these interesting kind of like shadows going across things. So that one, I think I used a longer focal length. So the longer focal length will stop things converging too much, keeping your verticals nice and sharp and aligned, but it's up to you. And you can also see the sky here. Like I tuned up that dust and you know, the altitude, just to get the sky to the tone I wanted. If you wanted to add clouds to that, you could add them pretty quickly in Photoshop. You can add HDR images around the world as well. I'll show you that in another tutorial in time to come, but I think this is a good, you know, this is a good workflow that doesn't need a super powerful computer to get you going and doing something interesting. All right, so thank you and have a good day.